All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the September 26, 2023 Zoning Board of Appeals hearing. If you're planning to speak today and have not already done so, please sign in on the sign-in sheets located on the table near the door, and please also silence your cell phones during the hearing. Before we start, I will explain the procedures we will follow. When a case is called, the applicant will present their case to the board. The applications and full staff reports were all posted on the village website at least a week ago and were available for the public to review. The applicant and all speakers in support or opposition to the application are reminded that the board's decision will be based on the standards set forth in the village code, and all comments should be directed to those standards. I also request that all applicants confirm for the record whether or not the required posted notice was placed at the subject property. After the applicant's presentation is completed, the board may ask questions of the applicant and may ask questions of the applicant or other speakers at any time during the hearing. Comments first in support of and then in opposition to the application will be heard. After all testimony has been given, the applicant will have an opportunity to provide rebuttal testimony. At the conclusion of the applicant's rebuttal, the case will be closed. After closing the hearing for each individual case, the commission will deliberate and vote. During this time, no additional testimony may be given by anyone. Please note that if your case is approved today, a written decision will be mailed to you. Before we open the first case, please note, as Ms. Wiedrich said, we're all volunteers. I'd like each of the board members to confirm their presence for purposes of a roll call and establishing a quorum for this hearing.
Aaron Stuckey, present tonight.
Bill Sparks, present.
And Jamie Maywison, present. And Mr. Sparks will be a voting member of the board this evening. So we have established a quorum. We have meeting minutes to approve from the August 29th, 2023 meeting, but we do not have enough members here this evening that were present at that meeting to vote on that, so we will hold that for the next zoning board meeting. And I'd just like to say, as we sort of started before we went live and had some information shared about general village activities and in a conversational manner, what I just introduced in terms of our process sounds very formal, and we do have a process, but it is a conversation. So don't be nervous. Come share with us your application. We'll have a conversation. We'll discuss, and it's a little less formal and rigid. So if we could hear Ms. Wiedrich, the first case.
Sure. This is case number 1. The case type is an area variance. The address is 107 Roselawn Avenue. The applicant is Tracy Woke. The request is to construct a 30-foot by 7-foot 6-inch fence along the east property line and to construct a 55-foot by 7-foot 5-inch to 7-foot 10-inch fence along the west property line, not meeting the requirements for fences. I just want to make the board aware that we received one comment, which was emailed to you and also printed out for you. The fences were constructed already, so we're going through a legalization process. And if there's any questions from the board, I'm happy to answer those at this time or at any point during the hearing. So as the applicant, you can come up and present.
And if you would, just state your name and your address for the record, please.
sure this is on.
Okay. Jill. Ah, there we go. Should I start over? No, right? No? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. So in addition to my application, I have submitted a petition signed by many of my neighbors in support of the requested variance approval, all of whom have properties within approximately 500 feet of my home. Those signatures include the owners of properties immediately adjacent to mine, my next door neighbors on both sides, with whom I share the fences. These neighbors provided their agreement to the installation of the fences prior to their installation. One of those neighbors is here with me in support. I have also submitted photographs of my property and the adjacent properties, showing the subject fences from various angles. The construction is 395 linear feet without any fence. That's 82% of my property being open to visitors and deer. One of the unique things about my property is that my yard is at a higher elevation than both of my next door neighbors' adjacent yards. This is due to the original owner and builder, Charles Lombard, having built up the lot elevation before building the house. Adding that additional elevation to the height of my foundation, this makes the view from my back porch and deck quite higher than my adjacent neighbors. After I had my deck installed, which matches the height of my house foundation, I suggested to my neighbor on the east side that I plant some evergreens to provide some privacy between their back picnic area and my deck. They made a good point that this would unfortunately create total shade on their yard once the trees were fully grown and would also take up more space. They suggested a fence as an alternative, one that would still allow some light through and would be equally attractive on both sides. That's the fence that's installed now. We happily agreed and we made it a neighborly project. This east side fence is 30 feet long and is set back in from the front of my house by 10 feet. It was installed 3 years ago. On the west side, the opposite side of my house, there is a difference in the level of house and property maintenance. And as I do believe in everyone's right to live up to their own standards, the best solution for both properties was to install this fence and allow privacy for each residence. With the east side fence having turned out so well for the past few years, I decided to do the same thing on the west side. This west side fence is 55 feet long and is set back from the front of my house by 18 feet. It was installed in August of this year. Right now, the west side fence is quite bare, as it was just installed, and you can see that in the photos. The appearance will be much more discreet once I get the new plantings in and they have some time to grow. The shade of the wood will also mellow as it weathers, such as it has on the east side fence, where the plantings are also filling in nicely, as you can see in the photos. Again, this fence was installed a few years ago. Since receiving the code violation notice, I have taken closer notice of the properties on my street and found that there is at least one other property that has a 6-foot fence with a lattice topper of at least 1.5 feet, making that total height 7.8 feet. I mention this not as a complaint whatsoever. I'm happy for that family that has that fence that they wanted. I only mention this to point out that there appears to be other instances in my neighborhood where a fence is 6 foot tall and has a fence topper adding to the overall height. And I use the term fence topper as I have Google searched it, and apparently that is a thing in the fencing industry. They're called fence toppers. I do my best to maintain the original character of my house, as well as with an open and friendly appearance, and in keeping with the character of the neighborhood and the village. I have seen the use of lattice fence toppers around the village and always thought it was a charming look. I ask that you please approve my request for a variance based on the information and my unique circumstances that I've shared with you. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. All right, questions from board members?
Yeah,
That's okay.
please.
I'm so sorry.
No problem. I wasn't quite clear from your testimony about when the two fences were constructed.
Yeah,
At one
abs-
point, I thought you said years apart, and at another point, I thought you said quite recently, so.
Okay, yeah, let me clarify, please. The fence on the east side, the 30-foot fence, my neighbors right here are on the opposite side of that fence, and it was actually their decision on that fence style. That fence was installed about 3 years ago. The fence on the west side was installed in August, so last month. It took some weeks over the course of July and August. It was sort of a DIY project kind of thing.
Were there different reasons why each fence came into being? I mean, or
There are some differences, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, it was for privacy, because the elevation of my house, I can see out, and then people can see me up on my deck. The first fence that went in a few years ago, it was because of my neighbor, the Steblins here. They have a really nice, very private little picnic area at the way back of their yard, which is right up against my yard, because they're on a corner lot. So their backyard, the end of their yard butts into the side of my yard. So my deck and their picnic area are very close. And it would be almost like if they were having people over and I was having people over at the same time, it was almost like we were all together. So it was just really just to kind of have that separation there for us and give us a little privacy. It's also a beautiful backdrop for some really nice gardening that we've done. It's very aesthetic. It has a lot of appeal.
Understood. The situation on the other side was different?
Still for privacy, but that was more because of, well, I try really hard to keep my house and my property, really right up to par. I try to keep everything really nice. And my neighbor does not. And, there's been it's just been a little difficult sometimes living next to that person that just has different, they have a different lifestyle than me. So,
And if the topper weren't there, how would that change?
excuse me?
If the topper weren't there on that side of your house, what would
There'd be
be
less,
exposed that you don't want to see?
well, I mean, it's really quite translucent. You can see through it, but it breaks it up a little bit. So it's not so right there, it just breaks it up a little bit, softens it a little bit. So it's just not as obvious. And so that's what I would say the topper does. Definitely, it adds a little bit more privacy, but that softening more of the fence itself is more of the privacy. The lattice topping is more of a softening, more of a breaking it up a little bit. So it does add a little bit of more.
But it's largely an aesthetic thing rather than
It is very beautiful.
solving a problem in itself.
No, it does. Like I said, it does soften it. So it does provide a little bit of almost like a screen to almost make it like if you were looking at something that was a mess and now you're looking at it through a little bit of a blurriness, it doesn't look as bad. Maybe, that's kind of a comparison. But I will say that a stockade fence, right, like a solid stockade fence that I've seen, also around the village, they're not as attractive. So having the shadow box that allows light through a little bit, It's beautiful on both sides, and then having the lattice on the top, it's just like a transition so the top of the fence isn't like this hard stop, you know, of like a solid object. And it's very pleasant looking. I mean, we get compliments all the time, so. Not that it's about the looks, I know, it's about the code, so. Sorry.
So just looking at
Okay.
one of the pictures that you'd included, I was just kind of curious, you know, looking at that west side fence from, I believe it's the photo, looking down your driveway towards the garage, so that would be, sorry,
Are they
I
numbered?
should have counted my way through the photos,
Are
but
those numbered?
this particular one, I know that not everyone online obviously can see that, but if, Jill, if you could. Sure. It's the one with the, I believe it's a west-facing window, right by the chimney.
Is it this one?
Let me see if Jill gets it. She'll have it up in a split second. Yep, oh, that's the one, the top one. So, you know, looking at that, in that window, is it, from that window, the 6-foot section, the solid shadow boxed, you know, looking across that one.
What window?
Oh, sorry, the window on the house.
Oh, yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
let me try to clarify.
That's my kitchen window.
That is your kitchen
yes.
window with your kitchen sink.
You betcha.
Okay. So the 6-foot privacy, the 6-foot fence would basically eliminate nothing of the sight line into your neighbor's backyard and the vehicles parked there.
That is absolutely correct, yeah.
And what you're saying is that fence topper,
Yes, the fence
the
topper.
lattice on the top,
Yes,
is helping break up your visibility into that.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, thank you for pointing that out, because,
Yep, and just trying to understand,
yes.
making sure I'm understanding how you're.
Yep, that is one of
describing
the,
things.
one of the situations that the fence topper takes care of, that's right. I mean, too much as we can, you know. I'm not gonna put in like a solid fence that tall.
And just to clarify for the record, the drawings that we're looking at represented, where the fences are represented on the property line, these are survey drawings. It looks like they were made in July of 2000, so that would have been before the first fence was installed on the east side.
Oh, yeah, I added, so these are photocopies of my survey map.
Sure.
When I bought the house, it was that date, July 2000. And I measured back from the center line of the street to the edge of the front of the property, and then back to where the fence begins. So that is a representation of where the fence is, 30
Okay.
foot on the one side. And then 55 feet on the other side, that's right.
And then the same survey was used to locate the second fence on the west side?
That's right. That's my, where you see the highlight.
Sure.
Yep, that's my handiwork, right there.
Were the survey stakes still in place in 2000, when you installed the west side fence? Like, the reason I asked the question is, are we sure that the fence on the west side exists on the property line? That there's,
Yes.
no, okay.
Yep, a surveyor was there. He identified, you can see it on the map. You can see it on the survey map.
Right.
He did identify that, and so we know, in fact, that's the property line, that's right.
Okay,
And there's also a stake at the back of the property.
okay,
So there's in the front and the back.
perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
I
And
have no more questions.
Oh.
Any other questions?
No?
Okay.
No further questions from me.
Okay,
Okay, I don't think we have any other questions at this time for
Okay.
the applicant.
thank you.
I'll ask anyone else in favor or in support of this application that who wishes to speak can come up and introduce yourself, name and address, and
Can I just
give your
say one more
testimony.
thing?
Sure.
One of the signatures on the petition in support of the approval, your approval, is the gentleman that owns the house to my west,
Okay,
Carl.
thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Kathy Steblin. I live at 2 Prospect Street. I don't think I have too much more to add to what Tracy talked about, but I just want to say I've lived there since 1996, my husband and I. We've done a lot of renovations on the house to improve the house. That house is very important to me. I always say I'll be carried out in a box. It's blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into it. I'm an avid gardener, and Tracy was considerate enough to, tell me about the plants with the big trees. I was the one who suggested maybe we agree on a fence. It was very mutual. We both love it, and I have to say it is the gem of my yard. This is very stressful for me because I've done a lot of plantings around it, and it was suggested, I know, in the rebuttal that the vegetation could be part of the privacy. However, that goes away in the winter when the leaves fall off the plantings. And we, like she said, once she built that deck, I was kind of like, yikes, because I live on the corner lot. I have no privacy really on any side, and that is the one kind of like oasis in my backyard. The fence just provides just an extra barrier, and I think it's beautiful. I know that probably doesn't weigh into it, but the lattice work was aesthetically pleasing to me, and and it matches what's underneath Tracy's house on her porch. And I have seen lattice work on foundations of other houses, and I think it is in keeping with a village style. And I also just want to add, the village has appeal because there's many different styles of houses and different tastes. And I like it because it's not like having a homeowners association. People do different things. They paint differently on their houses. And we love being here. And if anybody wants to come for coffee at that picnic table, it's really nice. So that's all.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions from the board?
I have none.
Okay,
Do we have anyone else that would like to speak in support?
Brian Steblin, 2 Prospect Street in Fairport. I don't know if you can tell from just speaking to the zoning, from the photos in our backyard, when Tracy added her porch, a 6-foot fence, the sight line would be just to like the middle of her railing. So adding that extra lattice work is what blocks, like you, Tracy, but what blocks the actual porch from our backyard. So it's without that, it would just sort of like underline her deck rather than block it out.
okay, thanks for that clarification. Is there anyone else here to speak on behalf of this application? And anyone here to speak in opposition to the application? Okay. With that, I will close the public comment and the board will deliberate on the case.
Do we want to go through the standards? Okay.
All right, so when the board considers a case, we go through 5 different standards, the ones that you saw in your application. So we will go through those now and have some discussion, and then decide on taking this up for a vote. So the first standard is, will an undesirable change be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties should the requested area variance be granted? We've heard a lot of testimony and had discussion about the placement of the fence. The question related to the variance is specifically the height. Thoughts?
I'll let Aaron go first.
Phil, you are a gentleman. Thank you. Looking at that, in terms of the undesirable change, I think, looking at that, I have a little bit of a struggle terming it an undesirable change. With the height of variation, I mean, there are very few locations in the village that have a large height variation. Our village is rather flat, but having that height difference can be rather problematic. So I can understand the desire to go for it. Looking at that one, that's at least my thought. Phil?
When I went past the site, it was hard for me to conclude that that these fences changed the character of the neighborhood overall. Right? The village board made a policy judgment here that they didn't want larger than 6-foot fences anywhere in the village. So if I expand our consideration out to that scope, then the undesirable character starts to creep in. But on site, it's tough to conclude that in this particular location, that this is truly undesirable.
Well, and I forgot to do something that I always forget to do with every case that we consider, is to define the neighborhood. So I'll sort of pull us back and do that now, and propose that the neighborhood would be defined as Rose Lawn between Nelson and Beardsley. And so I think that,
Well, I tend to, the statute with working draws a distinction between the neighborhood and the affected properties.
sure,
Right? So, and I think so I tend to err on the side of expanding the neighborhood a little bit more than that. So here, I take into consideration the character of all of the houses on Rose Lawn, on Prospect, on West Ave, over, and say those are part and parcel of one neighborhood. And if I were to put 10 of these fences in that neighborhood, I think I'd have a problem with that. So, but as far as the affected property is concerned, that's a more difficult call.
And I want to remind the board that should you choose to approve this application, it doesn't set a precedent. It doesn't change code. Each application before you for any fence, or any variance for that matter, that has similarities to another case, doesn't mean that you have to vote that particular way. Each case is evaluated on its own merits.
yeah, I would say I had a similar thought as I observed, drove by the property and observed the fence. I don't think it creates an undesirable change related to the character of the neighborhood, given that it's set back. It's, currently in good condition. and I also don't think, both based on observation and testimony that's been provided this evening, that it appears to be a detriment to nearby properties, given the way that it was constructed.
I'll go a step further and say that's an easier case to make for the fence on the east side of the property. It's older, there's been landscaping and growth that partially obscures it, and it's not as obvious given its age and location. The western fence is almost twice as large, it's newer, it presents visually differently than the one on the east does. So, I'm judging, Jill, this is not a package deal. We are considering each fence individually.
You can approve a portion of, the other option that you may want to explore is conditioning on the addition of greenery, landscaping, so that it does mirror the other fence.
I know, my microphone is on.
You're on.
Yeah.
Yes, please be sure that you're bringing the microphone up to your mouths and speaking directly into them, just so that everybody out in TV land is able to hear.
Is that better, Jill? Now that's really loud.
Yeah.
Little too close. Looking at, as you mentioned it, I did note this fence actually coming or being constructed this summer during one of my runs through the area, and actually had thought about it. The matching did kind of balance it out, but looking at it, the addition of greenery at I believe it would be the north end of the fence towards Roselawn itself would help to, kind of shield a little bit of the visual appearance of the length of the fence. Is that, kind of relating to what you're talking about, Phil, and just in the age and the work that's been done on the other fence that's 3 years older, I believe it was, yes. Had to look at my notes.
I was going to say, do not be asking any questions if anyone
I'm
in the
not,
hearing
I'm
is
looking at my
closed.
notes. I wrote it down as she said it. It's 2020 and 2023. I can do math, most of the time.
Okay, are we ready to move on to the second
Yes.
standard? Can the benefit sought be achieved in some feasible manner other than an area variance? I think at this point in time, because the fences are already constructed for sure, it's an area variance or removal of the fence or some modification of the fence perhaps.
Well, I want to,
The applicant described the benefit to be sought as additional privacy.
Right.
Right? A 6-foot fence affords a level of privacy, and the lattice work is here more for aesthetic reasons than privacy reasons. So I think the answer to the question, can a benefit be sought in some feasible manner other than by the area variances? Yes, a 6-foot fence would do substantially what the 7-foot fence accomplishes.
Is that true, given the elevation issue that was brought up, though? I mean, is there,
It's not a perfect one-to-one
Sure.
comparison, but one gets substantial privacy with a 6-foot fence, and that's compliance. One gets an additional benefit, but not a in my opinion, not a substantial benefit by putting a 1.5-foot lattice on top of that.
Just to kind of follow on, Phil, with what you're describing, I did actually, was sitting there as they were discussing it, thinking about whether that could have been done using a planting of some taller, species of plant that would grow and provide some of the height that they're looking for. Unfortunately, I realized with the western fence, I think you would also run into difficulties because the driveway is right there. You'd very quickly start to limit your access and ability to utilize the driveway at the edge of the property. So that did, I think, limit a little bit what you'd be able to do planting-wise, I think, on the west side to some extent.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
I just want to circle back on, Aaron, your comment about the kitchen window and its proximity to the fence. I don't know if you want to follow up with that and weave that into this discussion?
That is a good point. Looking at that,
This one.
yeah, paging back through my photos to try to get to the right page. Sorry, you've already got it there. You know, Phil, that is probably the one viewpoint that would definitely be a 6-foot privacy fence would not give you a great deal of line of sight blockage into the other neighbor's yard.
True, but then the counter argument is this was purposely a lattice so that that didn't happen.
Nope, that's a good point.
Well, I think similarly, Mr. Steblin's testimony about the deck line, the fence, the additional height on the fence sort of gives a little bit more of a sightline
But that's on the
barrier.
other, but that's on the other
That's the
side
east
of the
side.
building.
That's the east side.
Yeah, and don't forget, the applicant did give testimony that the intent of that lattice area was almost like a filter to continue to blur. So you've got the shadow box fence of 6 feet and then the additional 1.5 feet to blur the view.
Shall we move on to the third?
Yes,
Yeah.
Will the proposed area variance have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district? I would say, my thought on this would be no.
yeah, and I agree.
It's
I
not
don't think this one's
having
a
any-
debatable point.
traffic
Yep, I concur.
interference or environmental impact. Standard 4, is the requested area variance substantial?
The question is measured how, right?
Right.
Is it if we're-
Is it a percentage of the total?
if we're talking percentages, it's 25% too big,
Sure.
Too tall.
too tall, sorry.
One of the things to keep in mind too is the code states, let me read it so that it's exact here. No fence shall be constructed, established, or built in excess of 6 feet in height, except, however, fences not exceeding 16 feet in length in any direction constructed or erected not closer than 10 feet to any lot line. Such fences shall not be built or established in excess of 7 feet. So the code does contemplate some sort of privacy fence that the code would allow to go up to 7 feet.
Yes, but not situated as these fences are.
Correct, but I just wanted to point out that the code does cover, in some manner, situations like this.
Agreed.
So yes, I think you're correct. While it's a 25% of the 6 feet that would be allowable at that length, I also think that's mitigated by the fact that the overage over 6 feet is the lattice, offering some visibility, if you will, and some aesthetic appeal. And do we have any other discussion on that one? I don't like sitting in the
Nope.
middle. I feel like I'm watching a tennis match. The 5th standard, has the alleged difficulty been self-created? I think, as with many of our applications, whether the proposed need for a variance has been built or not, in this case, yes, the difficulty was self-created. It's not uncommon for that to be the case, though.
Well, this is the textbook example of a self-created
Right.
hardship.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? I built it and I didn't get a permit for it when I was supposed to, and I don't want to take it down.
Sure. So we would answer yes
Yes.
to that question. So
Do you want to provide some more information other than yes?
yes, the difficulty has been self-created because the fence has already been erected
Without a permit.
in the absence of a permit or a previously approved variance. For the height of the fence. So does the board feel that we have sufficient information at this time to make a motion to vote on this case?
And let me take it one step further. Do you want to condition the action on
I'm-
landscaping?
Pardon the pun, but I'm on the fence here. On this one. I can be persuaded, but let me explain where I'm at. So, right, as I said, with respect to the first standard of an undesirable change, that I can see in context, it swings one way. In a larger context, it swings a different way. I think the benefit, it can be obtained in a substantial manner by strict compliance with the code. And I think that in this particular case, the self-created hardship weighs heavily in these factors. So I'm at a 2.5 out of 5 here.
Let me, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. So one of the things to consider is, yes, self-created hardship, that the fences were constructed without a permit and without a variance. But the other part, as you heard the testimony note several times from those in support of the application as well as the applicant, that there's an elevation change. And beyond that, we also have the presence of the kitchen window. And so I think the question becomes, does the elevation change, is that woven into the hardship? Does that lessen the self-created hardship? Because now we have a unique circumstance where the property lies, because of backfill, a little bit higher than neighboring properties. And perhaps to install a fence that meets code doesn't necessarily provide the same privacy expected or anticipated by those properties at a lower elevation. So I think that is fair to question. I think when it comes down to the discussion of an undesirable change, is to consider if the presence of the lattice will create such an undesirable change to the neighborhood. And I heard board members note that they didn't notice it from the street, that you can't see it from the front lot line. And I'm not saying that that alleviates all code concerns if you can't see it. But I think that's something to factor into, is the placement of the fence. It's not at the front lot line, it's a distance back in line with the house. So, and as far as looking at the neighborhood, I think it's fair to look at Roselawn and surrounding properties and say, okay, how does this factor into our evaluation of this proposal? Is it something that we feel is going to be a detriment to those neighbors? Will it impact them negatively?
Thanks for raising that. I think the way that I'm thinking about the undesirable change is in terms of, it's not fence or no fence, it's 6-foot fence or 6-foot fence plus lattice. And when you look at that to consider the sort of benefit cost trade-off between addressing the privacy concern and considering the undesirable change of the neighborhood, it seems like the benefit to the homeowner and potentially neighboring properties of that additional height far outweighs any undesirable change. Because my feeling, based on looking at this property specifically, is that there's still a fence there, whether it's 6 feet or 7 and however many inches on either fence, in either section. I'm not sure that if you took that additional height off, it would be noticeable to sort of anyone looking at the neighborhood, whereas it would probably be quite noticeable to the property owner and neighbor. You know, it probably affords a greater benefit than it does any potential undesirability in terms of the neighborhood character, I guess is how I'm thinking about that trade-off.
I understand your point.
And I'm not sure that I would feel that way in every single case. You know, but I think that with what we have in front of us here for this one is, that's kind of how I am weighing those things.
One question to put in front of to the two of you. Is there any desire, or would it make any difference to do some type of requirement to add some type of plant screening at that end of the north end of the fence along the driveway side, the western side, to make the fence less
Thanks for bringing us
visible
back to
from the
that.
street?
I do think that would make a bit of a difference, just to soften the fact that there's a fence there to begin with. Is it the east side fence? That's the older fence.
Yes.
And the landscaping there, I think, sort of shields the fact that there's even a fence there to begin with. So I would be in support of that.
Yeah,
Adding
I
that condition.
think that some kind of greenery landscaping is a necessary condition to retaining both the east side fence and authorizing the west side fence, yeah.
Okay.
But how would we word that is the key question here.
I've got the
I'll look
words.
to the expert for this one.
There we go.
We can approve on condition that the fence located on the west side, that landscaping be provided from the most northerly point to, maybe we see, would it be fair to say 20 feet from that point? So you're hitting right about where you can see the marking of 17 feet 2 inches.
So,
To the rear of the house.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna, that southwestern kind of corner point of the house where the driveway starts to
Yep,
kind of curve
yeah,
to the east.
yep. So let me see if I can repeat that. Okay. That the approval be conditioned on landscaping, the addition of landscaping on on 107 Rose Lawn property from the northern point of the fence to 20 feet south
The western fence.
On the western fence.
on the western fence.
There's a tree or something that can be seen in that same photograph that had the kitchen window in it.
Something like a rose of Sharon by the car, is that what you're
Yeah,
referring to?
next to the car in that photograph.
And that could very well be about 20 feet, rather than base it on, because I think I know where you're going, Phil, I'm going to put words into your mouth. Rather than going to that, to a marker that's not permanent, my preference is to have it be a length. So if you'd like to go farther than 20, we can do that.
Could you do it by fence panel? So say at least
You're probably better by street
just
length.
length. That
I
works for
think
me.
20 feet's about right. If these are 6-foot fence segments, I can see just about 3 segments to that tree, so 20 feet, I think, is fair.
Okay. So one thing to keep in mind too, and maybe this will be helpful for the audience too, is when a decision is made by any of the land use boards and there are conditions attached to it, the case is not closed out, so to speak, until those conditions are met. And so those conditions are verified by myself and my colleague, Mark Lindsay, who is the code enforcement officer.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve this case, to vote to approve this case with the addition of the condition we just discussed?
I'll make the motion.
I will second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. You are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. If you have other things to do this evening, you may also go enjoy yourselves. All right, so we're ready to hear case 2. Ms.
Okay.
Weidrich, would you read the case?
Sure, so this is case 2. The case type is an area variance. The address is 8 Beardsley Street. The applicant is Peter Kenny. The request is to construct an accessory structure, and this is an addition onto the garage, not meeting the setback requirement. So the applicant can come forward and present your case. You may both come up.
This is Peter Kenny, 8 Beardsley Street, and I'm Kieran Kenny, 11 Barrett Place. I'll be acting as the general contractor. We're looking to just add on to an existing garage that we built 39 years ago, or 34 years ago. In 1989, we got a request from 10 feet down to 3 feet. So because of a narrow backyard, we kept it off to the side where the original garage was. So now we're looking to add on 10 feet deeper, still maintain the wall line and structure of the roof, so it all looks the same without any offsets or anything off and jogs in it for more storage, so we can do that. If you look at the neighborhood, the adjacent yard, the garage is right next door, 3 feet off of their lot line. Behind that is one on West Avenue, it's in the back of their lot line. 3 houses down on Roseland Avenue is a 2-car garage, or a 2-story garage. And right directly behind my brother's lot line is the parking lot for the group home on Roseland Avenue. So we're just requesting that basically we're allowed to go from 5 feet to 3 feet, maintain the look of the structure that's there, and just add on some size of approximately 240 square feet.
If you go from the front of the garage, we're at that 3 foot to the property line. My garage and property lines are on an angle. So where the new addition starts on like 4 feet 6 inches. So the back 10 feet will be within the 5 foot, outside the 5 foot of the property line, but that's when you get a.
But we want to take it to the 3 foot, so it just, it's on the map as 3 feet,
Yes.
and then that way,
Yeah.
we've got a little room to maneuver if we're offline just a little bit. All right?
Okay, thanks very much. If you would stay at the podium,
Sure.
we'll open it for board questions.
Yep.
This is merely a building for additional storage?
Yes.
Are there any utilities other than electricity?
Just 110 into the garage for lighting and a few plugs
Yep.
currently, and that's the way it's finished up.
Yep.
I've just run out of space. If you look, when the original garage was built, we wanted to go about the distance we're going, but at the current time, if you went over a certain square footage, you had to have engineered plans. 34 years ago, I did not have the money to pay for an engineered plans, so we scaled the garage back to what it currently is. But as you can see in the one picture, my pickup truck goes from the front door to my tool beds on the back, so trying to get room for the lawnmower and all that stuff into the back section of the garage.
Are you storing business equipment and that sort of thing, or just
Retired.
personal stuff?
Retired all my own.
What will the impact on the pool and the deck area that's built around the pool be? Would the, it's,
It won't close in on that at all.
okay,
As you can see in that one picture, the space, it'll maintain the same distance from the pool, there's about 6 feet there, 6 to
okay,
6.5 feet between the garage and the decking there. So we dropped back in that picture just about to the just before the steps on the pool deck.
okay.
Not that I want to throw everything off, but when you're on the earlier case, property line changes. You go to the front of my garage, to the north, my line drops 2 feet. So if we put a 6-foot fence up and you're standing there, it's only really a 4-foot
Ah.
fence. Because of the property drop, that, very common in our whole area down there, that the lots are all on angles and drops, so.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have no more questions.
No
Okay.
questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here this evening to speak in favor of this application? Anyone present to speak in opposition? Okay, we'll close the public portion of the meeting and take up the standards. Will an undesirable change, thanks, Aaron, will define the neighborhood for this case at 8 Beardsley Street. I would propose Beardsley from West Avenue to Roselawn.
I agree.
Agree?
Yep.
Okay. So the first standard, will an undesirable change be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties created by the requested area variance? I think the extension of the garage at the same setback line that's already been approved, and the location of it on the property will be hardly noticeable.
Yeah, I see no harm here.
I concur.
Okay. Will the benefit sought by the applicant, or could the benefit sought by the applicant be achieved in some feasible manner other than an area variance? Other than reducing the width of the garage to extend it? Probably not.
Yeah, but that's
and it
right.
doesn't make any
I
sense.
think that's right. Right, you could reduce the width, but I see no harm here in allowing, in fact,
Yeah.
aesthetically, it may be better simply to continue the non-conforming line.
I agree. Will the proposed area variance have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district? I see no impact here, really.
I don't either.
I don't see anything.
Okay. Is the requested area variance substantial?
Listen, this was my one concern. I posted to Jill in an email about the relationship between the accessory garage and the principal house. And you told me that there is no rule in our zoning code that applies here. So, to me, the answer here has to be no.
I agree. And I had a similar thought about whether the bulk lot requirements apply, and they don't. And it wouldn't come into play here because of the size of the lot also. Sometimes we see that with
Right.
accessory structures. So I think we're okay on those points. Will the alleged difficulty, or is the alleged difficulty self-created? To extend the garage, yes. But again, for all of the reasons we discussed in keeping with the line of the existing garage and affording the additional space, it seems reasonable.
Seems reasonable.
Reasonable,
I agree.
yeah.
Okay. Did you have anything else?
No?
All right. Do we have a motion to vote on this case as submitted?
I will move to approve the application as submitted.
And I will move to second it.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And it passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, case number 3.
If you don't mind, I'm just going to get up, set it up technology-wise.
Oh, sure.
Of course.
Okay, so this is case 3. This case type is an area variance. The address is 249 South Main Street. The applicant is Quattro Consulting Group. The request is to construct a 6-foot by 335-foot solid fence and a 4-foot by 187-foot decorative fence in the front yard, not meeting the requirements for fences. 3 comments were received, and those were emailed to the board members and also printed for them, so they have a hard copy. The application at the core is about the definition of the front yard in the RB district. And so the definition guides us to whichever line is the most narrow, this being the one on Park Circle, is that front yard. And so you'll notice in your staff report that I have taken the submitted survey map with the proposed fence and outlined in purple what would be considered the front yard per our code. So if the applicant would like to come and present.
Hello,
Good evening.
my name is Joseph Burkhart. I'm the owner of 249 South Main Street. I was previously on the zoning board, and I believe I was traded for a future pick to the planning board. And I currently sit on the planning board. I'm also on the partnership board. I live on West Avenue, so I'd like to think of myself as a community guy. A little bit of history on the property. I acquired this property in the fall of 2020 with the intent of one day renovating, remodeling, and hopefully living there for myself and my family. As you can see, we've obviously embarked upon that journey, and we will see how far we get. There were a lot of options of what I could have done with this property. Some would have been more financially wise, but I like this community. I think that's a very special property, and I'd like to kind of keep it in the state that it's in, as one lot and a single family home on it. Part of what I'm trying to do there is really keeping it within the character of the village, and given my involvement with the village, I like to believe that I have a strong sense of what that means. But we've had a lot of issues from day one, from school kids cutting through the lot, playing in the yard, neighbors walking through the yard, people walking their dogs in the yard, and I think it's a factor of the property somewhat being left abandoned for a long period of time and kind of absorbed by the community. I grew up at Misty Pine, and I went to kindergarten at Brooks Hill, and I remember, this was 1991. I remember walking through that yard, and the house looked the same then as it did when I purchased it. So I just think, given that amount of time, it has been kind of recouped by the community. just a few weeks ago, I had to stop over because there was a gentleman who I'm not sure exactly who he is, but he identified himself as a neighbor, standing on top of the spoils, looking down into the pit where we're pouring our foundation. And, you know, I had to ask him to leave. I understand that he was curious and appreciated an understanding of what was going on, but had he fallen in, he would have impaled himself on the rebar, and this being a Friday afternoon, we would not have found him until Monday. And candidly, in those situations, usually somebody will smell him before we find him. And I think my general concern and the reason why I'm here today is safety. And although construction will end, it's hard for me to believe that if so many people are so careless with their own safety, that they will be more responsible with the safety of myself and my family. So with that, today I'm requesting a variance to install a fence around the property. And how I would look at this in layman terms, and I understand from a legal perspective it's looked at a little bit differently, but what I would like the board and how I would like you to see this is that the front yard be what I think we would normally consider a front yard for that property, where the front door is. If you were to walk out, to me, that's what the front yard should be. Right now, that is not the definition of the code, and I think that is a mischaracterization of what the front yard should be. I think part of the reason why this board exists is because of these kind of anomalies within the code, and I don't believe that the Park Circle Drive side should be considered a front yard. In addition to that, I would like your approval to put a 4-foot fence in what I define as the front yard on the border of the property. As I've outlined in my application, you know, the key considerations for me are safety, privacy, and quiet enjoyment of the property. So with that, I'd like to field any questions you may have.
I just want to jump in before you start questions. So part of the code states that when there's a sidewalk, the fence must be 3 feet from that sidewalk, and the applicant, as proposed, will be doing that. So you see that the fence is drawn on the property lines, but next to the sidewalk, will be required to be 3 feet from.
Okay, sorry, just making a notation. So in the drawing that we have, now it looks like the blue line represents where the 4-foot fence would be envisioned, and then the red line represents the 6-foot fence. Is there a reason? I love that, first of all, because I think the code is, I struggle with this code for the same reason that envisioning a 6-foot fence in front of the front door of that house being right on the main street. You know, there's the trade-off with privacy and safety, but also it's a beautiful house, and I can't imagine it being covered up. So I appreciate this proposed change here in dropping that fence height there. Is there a reason that we wouldn't, or that you wouldn't continue, because the Park Circle side is technically by code the front yard, consider extending the 4-foot height back some distance, maybe not all the way to the back, what would that be? Southeastern corner property line, or property corner, but some distance back that way, because there is, you know, pedestrian traffic there, and it's sort of very neighborhood-like versus, you know, what I'm going to call your back lawn on the eastern border of the property and the north border of the property that would be adjacent. You know, I could see guess it kind of makes sense that those might be taller privacy fences versus a decorative shorter fence. Any thoughts on why you'd want to go to 6 feet right there at the, almost at the corner of Park and Hulbert?
Sure. So two reasons. Primarily, one is ultimately, I'm not looking to be held to any higher standard than any of my neighbors. I think what I'm really here for is obviously to reconcile this front yard confusion and anomaly in the code. And then with that, I'd like the same rights as any of my other neighbors where I could, if that was my front yard, install a 6-foot fence there as of right. In addition to that, right across Park Circle Drive, there is a 6-foot privacy fence installed currently. So I don't feel that it's out of character necessarily, and I will admit that the property directly across Park Circle Drive is not in the village. However, you know, it is an adjacent property, and it does currently have a 6-foot fence for a long distance there. So I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable that I would try to achieve the same thing.
And how far, I'm trying to see where the, oh, here it is. Looks like almost 11 feet from the southwest property corner to where on Park Circle, it's proposed that the 4-foot height fence would end. Is that about 11?
No, it's
Am I reading that number? I need reading glasses. I
closer to
think.
45.
45 feet. Okay,
So it's quite a ways there.
okay. It was one of the other things that I was contemplating was effect on sort of traffic and being able to see around that corner, but
I'm not
Okay.
sure it's going to be a concern.
yeah. Questions from other members of the board?
Yeah, I have to say, this one gives me some trouble. The, this property is unique in any number of ways, right? Historically, this would have been the gateway property to the village of Fairport. Village boundary, before there was a Park Circle Drive, before there was Winding Brook Drive, this is where the village started. Right? And the idea of a solid fence that blocks that property from view troubles me a bit. Can you assuage my concerns on that point?
Well, as of right now, tomorrow, I could install a 165-foot, 6-foot-high fence along Main Street in front of that property. In lieu of that, I am requesting what you see before you, because I feel that this before you is much more in line with the character of this village than me installing that 165-foot-long, 6-foot-high fence on Main Street. And I think that trade is a beneficial trade for both myself and the village and the neighbors and those folks who were so kind to write letters to hopefully help persuade you.
One other thing to consider, and the board not too many months ago did entertain, you'll be familiar with some of the houses on Mosley, so south of Park Circle, have 2 front yards. So they are located on Manor Hill, and then, of course, they have a front yard on Mosley. And so those fences are solid through that area. And they are 3 feet from the sidewalk. Just for
The one that I'm thinking about, again, it's strange that the code defines it as 2 front yards because it's technically, the one that I'm thinking of that we considered, it was, I believe, their backyard that backs to Mosley. So in terms of a comparison,
I'm thinking strictly in appearance, but you are correct. So, and keep in mind too, that this property is located in the RB district.
Right.
The properties that are located in Park Circle, Manor Hill, et cetera, in that neighborhood are RA.
Right.
So RA, if this was an RA property, it would have South Main Street at its entirety would be a front yard.
Right.
And Park Circle in its entirety would be a front yard.
Right.
In this case, because the property is located in RB, we end up with the front yard being a little bit awkward, for lack of a better term. And so the applicant is correct that by code, they would be allowed from approximately that front door to their property, and surrounding majority of the property, half of the property, that they could put a 6-foot solid fence.
Right.
I was curious, how are you going to handle the driveways exiting through the fence on either Park Circle or South Main? Do you plan to keep them, or are you changing the structure of your drives?
No, they are scheduled to remain as currently located.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I appreciate what, your point regarding, what you're able to do based on how the code currently reads. I think in the same vein, I'm thinking about how the code currently reads in relation to the actual defined front yard. And that's a lot of really tall fence, right on a property, even though it's in the RB district, right on sort of the edge of another zoning district. So just thinking through the length of 6-foot fence on what is in that district defined as the front yard. Incoming,
Yeah.
the 6-foot fence starting or running the majority of the length of the Park Circle property line.
I wish we had smart boards so that
know, I
you could
wanna
show us.
Point and draw. And
Dan, do you mind bringing up? Okay. Jamie, maybe you can guide me and tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the southwest corner. So it would be the corner of Park Circle and South Main.
Right, where the
Right.
purple front yard
Yep.
arrow's pointing at, right?
And so the drawing shows that the 4-foot fence would go back to the dotted line. And then the 6-foot fence would pick up from there, and sort of the driveway is in the midst of that. I guess I'm thinking that from an aesthetic perspective and a sort of community openness perspective, as you drive up that road, would it make sense to carry the 4-foot fence back a little bit farther, maybe to the driveway, and then start the 6-foot fence on the other side of the driveway? If, I don't know if you have a gate plan for the driveway or something like that, so,
If I can just ask the applicant, because this, the structure is undergoing renovation and addition, how far back is the addition going from the corner of the existing house? We have the survey map.
I couldn't tell you exactly.
Okay.
I had to guess off the top of my head, say 20 feet.
20 feet.
Maybe more. It's hard for me to kind of ballpark that right now.
So,
I guess the technical front of the house would be extended another 20 feet towards Park Circle Drive.
could we say lining up with this corner here of the existing garage?
No.
No.
That would be,
That's more than 20 feet, I would suppose.
yeah, it's,
Maybe here?
I mean, I think it would help if we had some indication of what that build-out was gonna look like. what would make sense in terms of the fence as it relates to the front yard. Are you intending for Park Circle to be the entrance to the home?
Currently, there's 2 entrances, and I
Right.
intend for them both to be functional entrances.
Okay.
And the addition is a garage with some living space above it.
Okay. And is the driveway that's pictured here staying located where?
Roughly. Obviously, that attached garage is absorbing some of that space.
But where it meets Park Circle? That'll remain
Yes,
the entry and exit point?
correct. Yeah.
2 curb cuts, I believe, as you said before, the 2 curb cuts are staying basically where they are, they're staying where they are now. And that, as you're pointing out, there may be some readjustment of the driveway
Inside the
inside
lot.
the property in the lot lines to reach back to the driveway.
Cor-
Excuse me, garage that you're adding in.
Correct.
And the new garage, I'm sorry, after driving by there, I'm trying to think about how the addition was laid out. The garage would be facing the garage doors would be facing the south, the Park Circle side.
There are garage doors facing both the south and west.
And west. Okay. Making sure I had that correct in my head. I didn't catch the ones facing the west. I did not go wandering through the property since you added the fence there over the last,
I
the
appreciate
construction
that.
fence.
Thank you.
But like many other people in the village, I'm pretty sure many of us have been watching it, hoping to see the work go on, so it's good.
There's a question brewing over here, I
Well,
feel like.
No, when I'm struggling, I analyzed the wrong problem when I read my packet. And so the questions I had been prepared to ask are the wrong questions. So I'm struggling to get my head around the problem that's properly defined.
It is a little bit challenging, again, because I think we as residents of the village view the front yard being South Main.
South Main Street, yes.
And the definition, it's a little bit like writing with your non-dominant hand. The front yard by
Nicely
the,
put.
yeah, the front yard by the code is a portion of South Main Street, all of Park Circle, and then a portion of that, what we would refer to as the rear lot line. So essentially, if we were standing on Park Circle, the front yard is viewed as everything in front of that, the wall of the house. And so because of that, the requirements are obviously that it needs to be 4-foot decorative, it can't be longer than 10 feet, et cetera, et cetera. And then everything back from that line can be 6 feet solid, per the code. So we've got a unique situation here where we have, and that's why applications come to the Zoning Board of Appeals, is when there is a unique situation that isn't necessarily covered by the code. So all the other properties in the RB district, because of the way they're situated, most of them aren't on a corner property.
Right.
They don't have this unique situation that the front yard definition works for those properties. For this one, it's different, and again, writing with our non-dominant hand. So the question, I think, becomes is, does that definition of the front yard work for this property in terms of what the expectations are for what village residents will see and for what property owners can expect when putting a fence around their property? So the average resident in the village looks out their front door and says, this is my front yard. And they look out their back door, they said, this is my back door, and everything else is side, right? And so when they're designing a fence or proposing a fence, it's very predictable for them. In this case, the unique situation is that the definition of the front yard does not lend itself to a corner property in the RB district.
Agreed.
certainly does not match the expectations of what the front yard is for nearly everyone. I think probably everyone on the board, and I believe the property owner as well, looking at it.
It was a slight surprise to everyone, I believe.
Yeah, the problem here is that we can't rewrite the code itself. We have to figure out how to construct a variance to what the code actually says. And,
You know,
it'd take me the better part of a week, I think, if I were gonna draft that.
Well, keep in mind that we are going to be starting a zoning code update, and so there's lots of opportunities. One of the things that will happen is we'll evaluate all the cases that have come before the zoning board of appeals and say, okay, what ones stick out? What variances are you often issuing? And to ensure that the code meets the majority of properties as best that it can.
But even then, I think this one would be
This is
an
still-
outlier.
Correct. And so the variance process is intended for these outliers. And so I think the board is tasked with figuring out what works for the property, what works for the applicant, and balancing that against the needs of the village and the neighborhood as defined.
I agree with you 100%, but that was not the problem I analyzed coming in this evening.
Well, we can talk offline about the problem that you analyzed, because I'm curious.
he's wrapping his mind around it. Looking at this one, I appreciate the demarcation you gave us, helping to explain what you think we're suggesting as the front yard versus, Jill, your work to show what it actually is per the code.
I'm showing per the code.
Right, in the second drawing. I was curious, would you be willing to entertain extending that 4-foot fence at least a little further to the west, or, excuse me, on the Park Circle side, moving a little further to the east? Looking at it, there would be several other options for a location to stop the shorter fence and transition to the higher 6-foot privacy fence. Thinking about it, could it be the northern edge of the driveway or of your curb cut, or the south edge of the addition that you're putting on with the garage? I'm sorry, it would not be the south edge. It would be the western edge of the new addition, or the eastern edge of that new addition would just be handy or useful references to say that, that's where we would stop the shorter fence and transition to the higher fence.
Sure, so I understand what you're requesting. I think I'm having a couple of struggles with that. First, what I want to be held accountable for is the code. I think my issue is, what is the definition of a front yard? And I think we've all agreed here thus far that it is improper for this property. So with that alteration, saying that we all agree that the front yard should be the Main Street side, what I would like to be held accountable for at that point then is what the code states I'm allowed to do. Now, I'm also here asking you for a front yard fence, so I understand that's the next complexity to this. But if we all were to walk away and agree that the front yard is the south main side of this property, then that 6-foot fence could be built just as of right. Much like the 6-foot fence on the opposite side of Park Circle Drive is currently there. Although that property is in the town, there is currently a 6-foot fence there.
The 6-foot fence on the South Main Street side, though, would only be about half of the northern frontage of that property, right? Under the current code, because the front yard would extend.
I'm not sure
So
that
the fence being in line, we're talking about 12 Mosley, correct?
No, so on this drawing here, so I'm just trying to, under the code, the front yard purple line is drawn from about half, it's probably not exactly, but about halfway from the Park Circle intersection, like up to, looks like about the front corner, what would be the
The bump out.
bump out on the house. And it would extend all the way down Park Circle to the back of the property line, and then about halfway up the back property line. So that would be under current code, that's where you could do, or where you'd be required to do 4-foot decorative fencing.
Correct, but you could only do it for a length of 10 feet.
Correct. And then the rest of the property line could be a 6-foot fence
Correct.
at any linear length.
Correct.
Okay. Okay,
And it could be
So-
solid.
okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Burkhart, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no,
Um,
no, no, no. And-
So, go ahead.
And I very much feel the other half of the response to that is, I'm here asking for a variance on the basis of, logic, equitable application of the code,
Yep.
safety, privacy, quiet enjoyment. I don't necessarily feel it's appropriate to be imposed with additional conditions beyond what I'm asking for. So I very much think that saying that the Main Street side as the front of the house gives me an as of right for the 6-foot fence on the Park Circle Drive, no different than any of my neighbors in that district, no different than any of my neighbors down South Main Street. And then, hand in hand, I am asking for your consideration for a front yard fence that would be longer than 10 foot and all other things meeting the code. So I know that was a long-winded response. I apologize. I just wanted to put it all out there for you. This was something that Jill and I had spent a lot of time on, and so far this month, I think Jill and I have spent 7-8 hours together, and I'm not keeping track, but my wife is. And we've talked about this. I think every time I've seen you, we've talked a little bit about it. I had a number of phone calls. Sorting this out has not been simple, and I think some of the agita that you're experiencing right now, we've fortunately had a lot more time to process to get to this point. But I think you're seeing a lot of the same complexities that we've tried to digest and I've tried to process in what I feel is a very reasonable and rational request for this property.
So I think what I'm trying to understand is what would prevent consideration of keeping the fence at the 4-foot height around the corner of Park Circle, which is technically defined in the code as the front yard, back to somewhere around the curb cut for the driveway, or some other reasonable point in there.
Would the board find that would be appropriate to, we've talked several times about 12 Mosley, that again is in the town, but has a solid 6-foot fence. Would it be fair to, and when we talked about earlier, the addition puts on about 20 feet towards the rear of the property?
I might be able to look it up if you want to give me a minute.
Sure. And so,
When you say rear of the property, Jill, are you talking about
East.
toward Park Circle?
I'm
or
sorry.
Toward,
toward Park Circle. Again, this is, if I, Dan, do you mind bringing it up again? This is where the definition of front yard gets a little tricky, right? I'm saying rear of the property, but it's
actually the front yard.
but it's actually front yard. Or actually, that would be the rear of the property. So the addition is, let's say, plus or minus 20 feet here, which would likely, based on the pictures, almost be in line with 12 Mosley's solid fence.
12 Mosley is the one that's right across from
Yes.
Park
Yeah.
Circle.
Correct.
That's
Okay.
that little gray house.
Yeah.
For me, the house at 12 Mosley has almost no relevance to this application. I mean, it's a set, low, single-family ranch on a small parcel of property that's not even in the village. and to try and conform our code to the town's code in a property that is so radically different than the property under consideration here makes little sense to me.
Sure, so a couple of thoughts there then. I will say that if that property was in the village, it could have that same fence as of right. And then if that is the logic, that I should be held to a standard of equal style homes, that would be the rest of the homes in the RB district, which by definition can only have one front yard. And
Yeah.
therefore, I'm requesting the ability to install a 6-foot fence on what we all have, I believe, agreed upon would be a side yard,
Yep.
had the code been written to accommodate what we all truly feel is the front yard of that home. And after looking, just eyeballing it here a little bit more, it's probably more like 33 or 34 feet from the existing southwest corner of the home. So the addition would extend approximately an additional 34 feet from the existing southwest corner of the home on the southeast facade of the home, extending south.
What might help the board a little bit, if you look at the pictometry image,
Which
Just-
image?
the pictometry image at the back of the staff report.
Satellite view.
I'm sorry, the satellite view. I'm accustomed to calling it the pictometry image. Just to give you an example, so the reason that we're having this discussion about the front yard being on Park Circle is, again, because the front yard in the RB district is the frontage that is the most narrow. So if, let's say, we had 239, let's say Park Circle started at 239. In this case, the front yard would be that which was on South Main. So the issue is a little bit the shape of the parcel, the size of the parcel, that while we're having this conversation about the front yard being on Park Circle, when I think the general public and the residents, those driving by, would presume that that front yard is on South Main Street.
I think the other thing to factor in that I've thought about, Jill, is that if it were zoned RA, you'd have 2 front yards.
Correct.
And so, which makes sense being on a corner lot, kind of. I mean, like, there's a lot there.
And oftentimes, properties that are on corner lots that have 2 front yards end up before zoning boards of appeals for fences, because it's rare that somebody is excited to have 2 front yards, because I think we all, in general, we like associating with people, we like being out and about, but we also enjoy our privacy. And so the fence code allows residents of the village to enjoy some privacy based on where their front yards are. And so when somebody has 2 front yards and they want to put up a fence, as we saw at the property on Mosley a couple of months ago, they do appear before you to have that proposal entertained.
I have no objection to a variance that deems the front yard to front on South Main Street. I'm not sure how to draft that.
So we can't vary the definition.
No, we
Yeah.
can't. That's why I say
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
However-
At the same time, I don't want to do violence to the definition that does specifically define the front yard as fronting on Park Circle Drive. And I'm struggling right now with how we pulled that off.
So I think the way to perhaps that you could handle it and view it is that, again, because there's a unique situation here, that the front yard per code is not where we would anticipate a front yard. The request is still for a variance for that front yard. So maybe don't get as caught up, focus on just the stuff in the purple. And so the question becomes, as proposed, just focusing on those purple lines, is that appropriate? Given the location and size of the property and its orientation with streets and the neighboring properties, is it appropriate to grant a variance to allow for a 4-foot decorative fence that's longer than 10 feet, to wrap around to approximately 44 feet, I believe it is, onto Park Circle, and then grant from that point on the rest of the quote-unquote front yard a 6-foot solid fence? So if you just focus and tailor the variance request to that portion, you have the opportunity then to approve the application as proposed on the submitted drawing, if that makes sense. That way you're capturing the applicant's proposal to install a 4-foot high fence where a 6-foot high solid fence would be allowed.
And if it makes you feel any better, my first request to Jill was, can we have a variance for the definition of front yard just to change? Because that solves one of our problems right off the bat here. And I understand, I learned a little bit as well, that it's not that simple, of course, so.
You could have tried requesting a zoning change.
To be,
That's actually more
stay
painful.
tuned.
Yeah, I guess that's coming
There's going to
anyways,
be an
right?
opportunity for that.
Yeah, that would be spot zoning though, so
Yeah, I know.
can't go there.
No, I,
Well, but no, I would say it would not be spot zoning because we would change the definition for all of the RB district.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought Aaron was referring just to this a
Oh, no.
zoning change just for this property.
there would be several other ways to deal with it, but.
Zoning has lots of magical tools. Zoning is a magical process.
Yeah. No, I will say that I completely understand the desire to maintain the edges of your property and not have people cutting through it. As someone who lives in a location that has many things in common with yours, if I did not have a front hedge, I would not have a front yard. So I get it. I really do.
So if we were to entertain approving the variance as proposed on the submitted drawing, what would be the impact on, given the 3-foot setback from the sidewalk, what would be the impact on the tree at the corner of Park Circle and South Main that's not in the right-of-way? So it's on the property side of the sidewalk, as well as the additional landscaping on Park Circle? Would that be maintained with either fence height?
So I will say that not very many of the trees there are in great shape. As you may be aware, we already took a couple of them down. One is still sitting there, awaiting my professional lumberjack services. That tree in particular, I think it's got a couple of, and I'm not an arborist, so I'm not sure the technical term, but it's a little tired. So ultimately, I think that tree is condemned as is. I'm not sure spatially where it sits in relationship to the sidewalk, standing here right now, but I would tell you that whether it is by my hand or that of God's, that tree, days are numbered.
I think it's fair to say that many of the trees on your property are rather aged.
Yeah, and some of those that have not been maintained have unfortunately succumbed to disease and other issues.
Does the board wish to consider the addition of landscaping along with the fence? Is that something that you feel would mitigate the appearance of the solid fence?
honestly, I would go in and say that I would not recommend putting in landscaping along a 6-foot tall privacy fence that's going to be 3 feet off the sidewalk. Simply because having run by many of them, the landscaping is almost always in the sidewalk.
Yeah, I think there would have to be a greater setback if that was gonna
And
be a condition, and I don't know that.
I don't think that's worth it at this point.
And certainly there will ultimately be landscaping. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get out of the ground right now, so I'm not anywhere near that point. I'm you know, doing the best I can here, but I can assure you that someday, if you're willing to bear with me, there will be plenty of landscaping there.
Would it be helpful to go through the standards?
Well, I guess what I'm, in relation to your last point about considering just the front yard and the variance required, right? I think where my questions were trying to get a better understanding is there more linear footage that we could stay in compliance with the code on the Park Circle being designated, on the Park Circle side of the property being designated front yard in the code? Can we stay, I mean, obviously, it's gonna require a variance, and it's gonna be substantial, even if the 4-foot height extends back to the driveway cut. What's remaining in comparison to what the code says, not to necessarily what makes sense, but what the code says is gonna be substantial. And that would, I think, be mitigated by the, only putting the front, the 4-foot height fence on the South Main Street side. So that would be sort of a trade-off. Do other board members have thoughts about whether I mean, I guess I wanted to know from Mr. Burkhart what the utility of the additional height from where you propose the transition in the drawing to, say, the western edge of the driveway is in that section.
Sure. So, like I've stated, I'm trying to be held to the same standard as my neighbors. So when you talk about, you know, this being substantial, I would argue that every other house from there to Main, or to Church Street along Main could do this same length of fence around their property. Now, they're not against Park Circle Drive, I understand that, but they could still put a 6-foot fence in the same locations around 3 sides of their property, up to the front plane of their house, same as I'm asking for now. So the utility is additional privacy, you know, safety, security, quiet enjoyment. We've discussed quite a bit of that. That's the functional utility, but if we talk about the substantial nature of this, it is no more of a standard than any one of my neighbors heading down South Main Street is held to. And some of them have put up fences, some of them have not, but every single one of them could do this as of right tomorrow, simply because the shape of their lot is a little different than mine.
Yeah, I understand that. They're also not a corner lot.
Some
which
are, some aren't.
Would it be helpful to the board to have the applicant discuss the fence examples within your staff report, or fence examples?
Yeah, I've reviewed those. Is there one that you've identified as the selected option?
No, I have not gotten there, and I think the discussion that we had was just to clarify my interpretation and understanding of what a decorative and ornamental fence means, more for the sake of the 4-foot fence versus the 6-foot fence. I have not made a selection. I didn't come here today with a selection to present to you or this be conditioned upon. I would request that I be held to the code and our mutual understanding that some of the examples that I provided you today do meet the code. And that's for a 6-foot fence or a front yard fence.
The board does have the opportunity to mitigate any negative impacts that they feel to condition it on a specific type of fence, or you could provide the applicant an opportunity to explore and make it more, conclude what fence you would like to have. But if the board sees fit that a particular fence is appropriate to mitigate any impact, that can be.
Okay, thank you.
We've thrown a lot of concepts out, but no language, and this is a tough one, and my inclination is to want to see the language that we're voting on, not just the concept that we're voting on.
So in terms of the language that you're voting on, so the requested variance is for, to install 6-foot by 335-foot solid fence and a 4-foot by 187-foot decorative fence in the front yard not meeting the requirements for fences. So that takes into account everything that's in the drawing in that purple lined area. And what I suggest you also do is condition the approval on the survey map as submitted with the 4-foot high fence shown in blue and the 6-foot high fence shown in red. And because you've heard several times from the applicant that because of the front yard definition and how he views that front yard, he proposes not to install the fence that would meet the code, being a 6-foot high solid fence in the area that is not the purple lined area, that this way you capture what has been proposed. So if you were to simply waive that portion in the purple lined area, the applicant still technically could. So I think it's important because the applicant has made the effort to propose something that is less than what he would be allowed to install. Is that what you were looking for, Phil?
The problem with any owner can install less than what the code requires.
Correct.
Right? So I'm still trying to figure out how to identify, how to craft the variance in a way that deals with just the front yard requirement
And I think that can be done just with the request itself.
Referring to the drawing.
Yup. The other option you could have, let's say you said that it could be a maximum of 4 feet and a maximum of 6 feet as presented. So should the applicant decide later on that perhaps maybe the 4 foot doesn't work in that area and their preference is to have 3 foot, that's acceptable too. And if 6 foot doesn't work, they could do 5 feet. So you could craft it that way.
but that would in effect be imposing a condition on the fencing in the side yard, right? A side yard fence not to exceed 4 feet in height, right?
Well, I wouldn't condition on that part. When I say this, my assumption, and it could be incorrect, is that the applicant, should he decide that he wanted to install a 3-foot fence, would not just install a 3-foot fence in the area that's the front yard, but would continue it for the rest of South Main Street.
Yeah,
So I've
it's the
added
word
more
assumption there
confusion.
that-
I've added more confusion now to the application, and so I'm going to rewind what I said. So I think, again, what the board should really focus on is that area in purple and evaluate whether or not that's appropriate. And if there's any conditions that may mitigate any of your reservations, or perhaps you don't have any reservations. And if that's the case, then my suggestion is that you take action on the area in the purple area, in the purple portion, and then also condition it on the drawing as presented, noting where the 4-foot high fence would be and the 6-foot high fence would be. Again, because the applicant is allowed to install a 6-foot solid fence in the areas that are not purple. I'm going to have Dan bring this up again because I know that there are people watching and I want to be sure we're explaining this. So the purple area that's outlined with an arrow that says front yard in purple is the subject area that we're speaking of. And this is the portion that requires the variance because this is viewed as the front yard per the definition. Yep.
Jill, if I could ask a question. With the addition going in and that addition of the garage, going further to the south, Park Circle, if that addition would move further south than the existing southernmost point of the existing house, the kind of South Main Street kind of ending bar of where you have marked as front yard and the opposing bar at the other side of the property, the eastern side, those would both move more towards the Park Circle side of things. Am I correct?
Correct. And that's why I think it would be best to approve on condition that the drawing as submitted.
That was partly raising that for clarity to make sure we all understood
Yep.
that.
So this is the maximum area that would be considered front yard.
The maximum area that would be considered front yard is
Shown by the
in
purple.
purple. Okay,
Correct.
gotcha.
But if you can think about it, yes, we're looking at this front yard variance. But we're also in many ways looking at the proposal as a whole because the applicant has proposed a trade-off in some respects. There's layers to this application, and you can see how complicated the definition of front yard can be.
Okay, are there any other questions from board members for the applicant?
No.
No. Okay.
Thanks for bearing with me here. I tried to make it clear. It's a little bit murky, so
The drawings definitely help, thank you.
thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this application?
My name is Audrey Valenti, and I live at 5 Park Circle Drive. So Mr. Burkhart's property and my house are the only two on Park Circle Drive. I used to tell people I live in the cook's house next door to the big house, and I've sold real estate for 38 years, and I've sold many significant major estates. I sold the Amasa Drake House, which is the second oldest house in the county. I've sold the Gannett Mansion. I've sold houses up and down East Avenue and on the side streets. And I had researched this property thoroughly, and I never heard that Park Circle Drive was the front of this house. It makes no sense at all. Obviously, Grand Cara just pulled up to the front house, and the tradesman came to the back door, the Park Circle Drive side. So I'm just wondering, isn't there a way to amend the deed or something to show that that is the front of the house? That doesn't make any difference. I'm very pleased with what Mr. Burkhardt has presented. I haven't set foot on the property since he owned it, even though I live next door and watch them every day. And I kept telling my husband, I'm going to go look over that little fence. He said, don't you even set foot on it. He's an attorney, and he's very dogmatic. So I do like what he's doing with the front yard, and the fact that he is extending the 4-foot fence on the Park Circle Drive, because you just can't see traffic coming otherwise. I think that's going to be quite handsome. I only have one concern, and that's when he puts a 6-foot fence up. From the 3 samples he shows, my last house was an 1834 stone house on 2 acres with slate roofs, marble pillars, granite columns at the bottom of the driveway. It was quite grand, a guest house and everything. I went by it a few weeks ago in Albany, and they've got the dark fence up like that, the really dark fence all along Loudonville Road and Ross Court, which is where the property is. It looks like the house, it looks like it's on lockdown. It looks like a prison with the dark, dark fence all around it. I was shocked. I took pictures to show everybody because that was always the showcase house on Loudonville Road, and everybody pointed that house out. Probably because I had 5 children and every light was on day and night. You know, the house with all the lights. You go past that. Anyway, I must commend Mr. Burkhardt for what he's doing. I've enjoyed watching it. I'd love to know what they're doing. We keep saying, where is all that cement going? You know, it's made our summer very entertaining. So I do approve of everything he's doing, and I think the 4-foot fence in the front is going to be quite stellar. Having lived in New Orleans, where fencing is a way of life, you know, I think the quality of the fence and the kind of fence is going to be significant in keeping with the style of the house. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone to speak in opposition of this application? Hearing no one, we'll close the public portion of this hearing and deliberate. Will an undesirable change be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties should the requested area variance be granted?
I have to say the reverse is probably true. If it's not granted, we get the detrimental effect here.
In part, I would say yes.
I would actually agree with that. If going with the traditional definition of the front yard would have been more detrimental, I think, to the our neighborhood.
Yeah, I think the only caveat I would put on that is for the Park Circle border, the choice of the 6-foot fence, I think, is going to be important, maybe more so than the other 2 sides of the property. But I don't know that I hesitate to condition it on a particular type of fencing.
Okay.
Because I don't know that that's necessarily, I don't feel like that's necessarily our role. I mean, I know it's within our purview,
Yes.
but to say like it can't be that or it has to be that
You could also make a recommendation.
feels not quite right.
You could also make a recommendation, you know, which is a little bit less strong than a condition, but still provide some guidance to the applicant.
Do you have proposed wording? Would it be something like that it,
The zoning
Maintain
board
the character
recommends,
of-
yep,
that it
that,
be in line with the character
that
of?
be in line with the character of surrounding, the fences that are located, have been constructed on surrounding properties.
Except I looked for fences around surrounding properties, and whether I'm driving down Church Street or South Main Street, there are no houses that are fenced in a way like is being proposed here. Or at least I couldn't find one.
Well, the focus, though, for that particular recommendation would be the solid fence. So not necessarily is the property fence similar to other properties, but I think the focus is, the question that I heard was, what does that solid fence look like? And that's for discussion. One of the other things, if I could ask you guys to define the neighborhood.
Thank you. I'm gonna have attach a buzzer to my leg or something that
I can
reminds me to do that.
I can just kick you.
I'm gonna make it your responsibility. How about that? I'm delegating the
We
responsibility.
have an assignment.
I get the kicker? Oh, wait, I have to define the neighborhood?
Define the neighborhood.
Ah, well, in this case,
You can cheat off my sheet if you want.
what did you say, South
I said
Main?
South Main from Hulbert to Church.
Oh, okay, yes. Sorry, you went from the south to the north, and I would typically go from the north to the south, so I think that's reasonable.
I think you may also want to consider Park Circle as well. Because you discussed an awful lot about that area, and I think if you say South Main from Hulbert, I think we should also include Park Circle in that.
Well, would it be Park Circle, or would it be the locations along Mosley Road that are backed, is it Manor and the Winding Hill area there as well, because those back onto Mosley Road, or have, excuse me, I should not say back, it is one of their two front yards.
Well,
I think those are different.
I don't think Park Circle is really part of the neighborhood. What's part of the neighborhood is that segment that runs from the intersection to 5 Park Circle Drive at the furthest.
Correct.
Right, it's that little piece of road that we're, and the sidewalk, right? I used to stand on that corner to catch the school bus to Martha Brown back when I was still young enough to go to school. But once you got to the circle itself, it was a different neighborhood. And it's reflected in the RA zoning itself, right? I mean, it was built to that RA standard, it's just different. So I think the answer is, yeah, it's Main Street to Church Street in the RB district only.
Yeah. We'd go with your original definition of the neighborhood. I'm good with it. Which was South Main from Hulbert to Church. which
And
is that-
including the RB district only.
Including the RB district
Yep.
only.
Yes, because there is
Yeah.
some RD and some. other-
Again,
Right.
right?
Yep.
When you turn
Yeah.
on the corner and you're at Brooks Hill School, you're not in the neighborhood anymore, right? I mean, all the kids are walking to school through the neighborhood, but when you get to school, you're not in it.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So will an undesirable change be produced in the character of the neighborhood as defined, or a detriment to nearby properties should the requested area variance be granted?
And I have written down that going with the definition of the front yard could be detrimental to the neighborhood. As a
Going
board,
with the existing definition.
correct, yep.
Agreed. Can the benefit sought be achieved in some feasible manner other than an area variance? We've discussed at length about the fact that it can't, that the way the house is oriented and
Well,
the shape of the lot and the zoning,
so
in relation to the zoning code,
So if you were to build what is allowed by right, then the answer would be no.
right,
Right? But you could build a fence less than that allowed by right, which would then be wholly code compliant. Let's imagine a 4-foot fence around the entire property.
That wouldn't be
It's
code
still not code
compliant.
compliant.
Yeah.
Why
because
wouldn't that code?
You still have the
Because
front yard.
10 feet.
Yeah,
Oh, you still have to do the front yard distance.
correct, the
Right.
length, yep.
That's right, I'm sorry, right.
I-
But with respect to the solid fencing, for example, the owner could voluntarily forego the solid fencing in favor of a 4-foot fence in its stead and be code compliant.
The owner could also choose to go with a hedge around the entire
Yep.
property and spend his entire summer trimming said hedge.
Right. But again, if the benefit here is safety, not having people cut through the yard, that kind of stuff, a lower fence would accomplish that. So this is not an all or nothing proposition. You could do something less than that required by right, which is code compliant, and get the same benefit that's being sought here.
I
So
don't think
let me
that's-
ask this question then. So part of the benefit of having a solid fence that we discussed in an earlier case tonight is privacy. And I think when we have a fence that has transparency to it, we lose that privacy. My neighbors can still see me running around my backyard, but if there's a solid wood fence, they cannot see me running around my backyard. So if there was a 4-foot decorative fence around the entire property, the privacy may not necessarily be achieved. Part of the request that the not having people cross in and out of the property is, but the privacy may not be. And I guess talk about that a little bit as a board.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I probably should not have.
No,
Put
no, you brought up a very good
specifications
point. That's why we have these standards and we discuss them and we really go through them and beat them up. I think it's very important what you're doing.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily suggesting a transparent fence around the entire property. Although, that's probably the furthest deviation from what the code allows by right. But
So I'll read this so that everybody hears this. Permitted front yard fences. The following fences may be erected in a front yard. Fences erected for decorative or ornamental purposes may be erected in the front yard of a principal building, provided that such fence is not longer than 10 feet on any side, and the average height of the fence does not exceed 4 feet. So the code speaks to 4-foot fences that are decorative in the front yard, meaning that there's a level of transparency to them.
I'd forgotten that, thank you.
That's okay.
But let's focus on the intuitive front yard here for a moment, okay? So the owner could put a 4-foot-high decorative fence along the entire line of South Main Street, right?
With a variance.
Without a variance.
No, because it's longer than 10 feet.
Any fence longer than 10 feet requires a variance?
Yes,
Because
in the front yard.
This is.
But it's not the front yard, it's the side yard.
That would
front
be the
yard
side
wraps
yard, but a
around.
portion of it would be the front yard.
So this is the front
Oh, I
yard
got
by
you.
code.
Oh,
So-
now it's clear. Okay.
So if
Yep.
it was gonna be, if there was gonna be a fence installed by
See, I
code, there
told you, I
could be a
analyzed the problem.
Well,
10-foot section.
but that really demonstrates how it's very difficult. This is, again, writing with your non-dominant hand because we view the front yard as being on South Main when the
Right.
code views it as being on Park Circle.
So under the code, what it could look like is half of the intuitive front yard with a 6-foot fence. and
Solid.
Solid,
Solid,
6-foot fence and 10 feet of whatever portion of that other part of the
Yes.
extension to the corner.
10 feet.
With a decorative 4-foot fence,
Yeah.
which is just crazy,
At the corner, he could keep all the kids from cutting the very tip of the corner.
maybe.
Yeah.
It
maybe.
would
Except
just
for the
create a
ones that-
different
Having
path,
stood there
right?
to catch my bus to school for years, I get that.
So I think the code as written does not provide the opportunities that the board has discussed for privacy, for safety.
Correct.
Yeah.
It also doesn't anticipate some of the uniquenesses of this particular property, I think. Standard 3, will the proposed area variance have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district? I think that is a no.
I would agree with it.
Well, I assume that aesthetics is part of the physical environment here, right? And we've already said that a 6-foot solid fence along the Park Circle side of the house is problematic in that respect. Right, we don't, I took Jamie to say she wants to extend the fence down Park Circle Drive a ways, so that would suggest that at least the visual environment is affected by the fence here, and I think that counts for purposes of this standard.
Fair enough.
So I just want to bring this up again so we can review this. So we've got, the 4-foot is proposed here to this line here. This line represents that, the front
Right.
of the house. So 4-foot here, and then 6-foot.
Right, and I
Continuing.
understood Jamie to say that she'd like that 4-foot segment to continue further down Park Circle Drive. Am I right?
I think less that I want that, more I was trying to understand what the benefit of switching it to a 6-foot fence
My mistake.
that early. You know, I recognize that I'm not the property owner, and, you know, we're here to consider the code and the standards that are laid out in the code. So, you know, it's not sort of my role or our role to say, like, this would be better. We're
Well-
sort of evaluating against the code. And
Yeah.
so, you know, it's an honest question, like, the flip side of the question is, well, what's the big deal of putting going to a 6-foot fence there, right? Like, if you carry the 4 feet to the front of the house, where in a zoning situation where you would be looking at a more traditional front yard definition, that's what it would be. I understand that. I was just trying to get a sense of, like, you know, is there market value in transitioning to a 6-foot fence there, given that technically by code, that is the front yard. But I think I'm okay either way.
How do the rest of the members feel?
I'm still, well, again, I may still be hung up on my improper analysis here, but I do think the visual environment, the proposed variance could have an adverse effect on the visual environment here.
So is it something that you feel can be mitigated?
Probably.
Do you have a proposal for that
I
mitigation?
wish I did.
So keep in mind that the zoning board, the expectation is that you grant the minimal relief to not have a negative impact on the neighborhood and still realize the desires of the proposal, the applicant's proposal. So if that, is it, I guess, you know, we talk in seeker terms, and granted this is a type 2, but we talk in seeker terms about there being no or small impact or medium to large impact. So if it's no to small impact, does it rise to the level of needing mitigation, and what does that mitigation look like? So if the board wants to talk about that a bit.
Looking at that fence and on regards to that question, thinking about the fence being, say, a 6-foot tall privacy fence, 3 feet away from the sidewalk, and my recollection is that is the sidewalk on that property side is the only sidewalk coming in and out of that,
Out of Park Circle
Out of
Drive,
Park
that's
Circle.
true. There is no sidewalk on the
on
other
the,
side of the street.
on the south side.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, going back to me as a walker and a runner here in the village, whenever the hedges in certain areas or the landscaping is confined to that small of an area, it often tends to find its way into the sidewalk rather than into the fence. So, looking at it from my perspective, I would say that the, our common mitigation ideas, plantings, things of that nature that we even used in an earlier discussion tonight, may not be as effective in this case and more problematic to the actual use of the neighborhood than what we would desire.
And so keep in mind too that the fence will be set back 3 feet from the sidewalk,
Right.
which in itself could serve as mitigation. So, oftentimes we see fences right on property lines and that makes them seem bigger than they actually are.
Yeah, although if I'm standing 3 feet in front of a 6-foot fence, it doesn't seem a whole lot bigger than if I'm closer to it.
Well, it's perspective, right?
Yes, it's perspective.
Some of us can't see over it either way, no matter how
I am also on that team. So let's go over that again. The proposed area variance will not have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood. Will it have an impact? And is that impact no or small? And I encourage you to think of it in terms of seeker and then evaluate it from there.
I think it would have an impact, but I think it will be a small impact.
I agree. It would have an impact, but it would be small.
I agree. Is the requested area variance substantial? I would say yes.
I don't think it gets much more substantial than this one. The
For,
fact that
for
we're
all of the
struggling with
reasons
it
that
so-
we've
yeah.
discussed.
Substantial, I think to some extent, there's also there's a mitigating factor on that, in that we are being offered the continued use of 4-foot tall fencing into what would be not the front yard per code,
Yes, I think that
but it is
the,
substantial.
But viewed from the perspective of the code itself,
It is
this is a
substantial.
substantial
Wildly
variance because it
substantial.
turns the code on its head.
but I do think the proposed drawing mitigates that and applies some common sense and logic to how the property is actually situated. Has the alleged difficulty been self-created? I think this might be one case where we could say no. The applicant did not face his front door toward the non-front yard of the house. And, the zoning code has been in place for a really long
Yeah,
time, so.
I think this derives directly from municipal action, not from anything that the owner has done.
I agree.
I concur.
This might be the only application I've been able to answer that question as a no for. Okay, with that, are we, do we have a motion to approve this application as proposed, including the submitted drawing reflecting the applicant's willingness to install a 4-foot fence, as noted on the drawing?
I think it may be worthwhile to say a fence not to exceed 4 feet,
Fair enough.
per noted in the drawing.
Can I have it done like this? To construct a 6-foot by 335-foot solid fence and a 4-foot by 187-foot decorative fence in the front yard not meeting the requirements for fences, on condition that the fence be constructed as proposed in the drawing submitted. And I will wordsmith that so it's better.
Yes.
Will the zoning officer understand what that means?
Being myself, yes.
Okay.
Do we have a motion to vote on this application?
I will so move.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Application's approved. Thank you, you
Thank you,
too.
you too.
And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I will make that motion.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
And the meeting, September 26th meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals is adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.